I never thought a normal Thursday morning could change everything. I woke up, had my coffee, kissed my kids, and left for work like any other day. But that day it was different. Something in the air felt off. Not the usual tension of deadlines or the mild stress of meetings. No, this was deeper, colder. I got to the office, and as soon as I walked in, I could feel it. Whispers, glances, the kind of smiles that don't reach eyes. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was imagining things, but deep down, I knew. I knew someone had it out for me, and I was right. They had planned to humiliate me, right there, in front of everyone. My hands shook as I reached for the files on my desk, pretending nothing was wrong. But I could feel every eye on me, every judgment, every tiny smirk that said, "You're next." It all started months before, though. A promotion I'd worked for, dreamed about, sacrificed so much for. I had put in the extra hours, taken on projects no one else wanted, stayed late when no one else cared. My name was whispered in meetings as the obvious choice. But life has a way of turning everything upside down. And I didn't see the betrayal coming. Not from strangers, not from colleagues, but from people I thought I could trust. My family had always been my anchor. My wife, Maria, steady and soft-spoken, the kind of woman who sees everything without needing words. My kids, Sam and little Lily, who ran into my arms every morning, laughing, careless of the world's problems. I'd promised them a better life, a stable home, security, the little luxuries we all crave but never talk about. And I believed in that promise with every fiber of my being. But promises are fragile, especially the ones we make to ourselves. I remember the first hint of trouble. It was a small thing, really, a snide comment in the break room, a passing remark during a team meeting. "Oh, John's probably not ready for that promotion." Just like that, casual, almost playful, as if someone had said it just to hear the words out loud. But I felt it like a punch in the chest. And instead of confronting it, I swallowed it, thinking, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Then came the emails. Little things at first, miscommunications, errors that weren't mine, documents misplaced. Nothing anyone else would notice. But I noticed. Every detail. And I started keeping track, writing down every incident, saving copies of emails, screenshots, anything that could prove what was happening. It became a quiet obsession. Not revenge, not yet. Just preparation. The day they humiliated me, they didn't even bother to hide it. My manager, a man I'd once respected, stood in the middle of the office and announced that the promotion I'd been working for, my promotion, had gone to someone else. Someone who, according to him, had shown more leadership potential. I froze. My coffee nearly spilled. Sam's face flashed in my mind. Lily's laughter, Maria's proud smile. I wanted to scream, to run, to demand justice. But I couldn't. I just stood there, nodding, smiling politely, while inside I felt like I was breaking into 1,000 pieces. I walked back to my desk, trying to keep calm, trying to breathe. And that's when it hit me. The proof. Every email, every note, every little detail I had meticulously saved, it all painted the picture. Not just of incompetence or favoritism, but of outright betrayal. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt ready. That night, at home, I didn't talk much. Maria noticed, of course. She always notices. But I just held her hand, sat on the couch with the kids playing around us, and let the silence speak. I didn't have answers yet. I didn't even know what I was going to do. But I knew this. They had underestimated me. They had thought I would crumble, that I would cry, that I would beg. But I wasn't going to. Not this time. The next morning, I walked into the office with a calm I didn't feel inside. I smiled, shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and went straight to my computer. I started pulling up every file, every email, every record. I knew exactly how to confront them. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with facts. Cold, undeniable facts. And when I did, when I finally laid it all out, the evidence, the inconsistencies, the favoritism, they couldn't deny it. Their eyes widened. Their smug smiles vanished. And for a moment, I saw fear there. Not the fear of losing a promotion, but the fear of being exposed. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just sat back and let it sink in. Justice doesn't need a loud voice. Sometimes, it just needs the truth. And that's when it hit me. The real lesson wasn't about revenge or getting my promotion back. It was about integrity. About staying true to yourself, even when the world tries to break you. About protecting the people who matter, the ones who wait at home, the ones who trust you, the ones who love you no matter what. I went home that night and hugged my kids tighter than ever. I kissed Maria and whispered that everything would be all right. And I knew it. Because when you stand firm in who you are, when you trust your own worth, the world can throw all its humiliation at you and still, somehow, you rise. It's been years since that day, but I carry it with me every morning. Not as bitterness, not as regret, but as a reminder. Life is fragile. People are unpredictable. But your integrity, your love, your quiet strength, those are things no one can take from you. No promotion, no betrayal, no humiliation. Sometimes I think about them, the people who tried to break me, and I hope they learn something, too. That power is fleeting. Recognition is temporary. But truth lasts forever. And in the end, that's all that really matters. Because at the heart of every struggle, every betrayal, every moment that feels unbearable, there's a lesson. A quiet, simple lesson about who you are, who you can be, and the life you choose to live. And that lesson, that's mine. And it's something I will carry for the rest of my life. I want you to picture our home before all of this happened. It wasn't big, not fancy, but it was ours. The kind of place that smelled like pancakes on Saturday mornings, where shoes lined the doorway, and the walls were decorated with crayon scribbles and school awards. That was my life. Maria worked at the local clinic, quiet, steady, always smiling even when she was tired. She had this way of making our little apartment feel warm, like it was bigger than it really was. Sam was 8 at the time, full of questions, full of energy, always curious about how things worked. He would follow me around the kitchen, asking about how the coffee machine worked, how bread rose in the oven, even why clouds float. And Lily was 4, a little whirlwind of laughter and hugs, the kind of kid who could make even the worst day feel bearable. She had this habit of crawling into my lap after school and demanding I tell her stories about the great adventures of life. And I did. I always did. Our family dinners were simple but sacred. Just the 4 of us, around a small table, talking about nothing and everything. I'd tell stories from work, exaggerated for effect. Maria would listen and smile, correcting the exaggerations just a little, and the kids would giggle, asking endless questions. Those moments, those quiet, ordinary moments, that's what I lived for. That's what I fought for every day. Work had always been tough, but I liked the challenge. I liked knowing that my efforts mattered. I wasn't ambitious in a flashy way. I didn't need the corner office or the big title. I just wanted to be recognized for my hard work, to know that my dedication made a difference. And I thought it did, until it didn't. I started noticing little things a few months before the big humiliation. My manager would assign me extra tasks, things no one else wanted, then criticize me for minor errors. The new guy, Mark, who had just joined, suddenly started getting praise for ideas I had suggested weeks earlier. I tried to stay calm. I tried to focus on the work. But every night, I'd go home exhausted, sit on the couch, and just stare at the ceiling, thinking, why me? I didn't talk about it at first. Not to Maria, not to anyone. I didn't want her to worry. She had enough on her plate with the kids. But sometimes, she'd notice the tension. One evening, she asked me, softly, "Are you okay, John?" I wanted to lie, to say yes, to smile and shrug it off. But I couldn't. Not this time. I sat there and told her the truth. The whispers, the favoritism, the feeling of being undermined. And she just held my hand. That's all she did. No advice, no judgment, just a hand in mine. And somehow, that made it all feel a little less heavy. We tried to keep life normal, even as I felt the storm brewing at work. Weekends were sacred. We'd go to the park, ride bikes, have ice cream. We'd laugh until our stomachs hurt. Those little escapes kept me sane. But every time I went back to work on Monday, the tension was waiting for me, and it was growing. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, like a shadow over your life. And I had been living under that shadow for months without realizing it. I thought I was prepared. I thought I could handle it. But nothing could have prepared me for the day they humiliated me in front of everyone. Even now, I remember the faces of my colleagues that day. Not all of them, but the ones who had been pretending to be my friends. The smirks, the quick glances, the whispers that didn't stop even when I sat down. I felt small, and I hated it. Hated feeling powerless in a place I had given everything to. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the apartment, making sure the kids had their homework done, that Lily's little stuffed animals were tucked in properly. I poured another cup of coffee and sat by the window, staring at the city lights, thinking about everything I had done to get here. About all the sacrifices, the late nights, the weekends I spent at the office instead of at the park. I thought about my father, who had always told me, work hard, do right by people, and good things will come. But sometimes, good things don't come, at least not in the way you expect. And sometimes, the people you trust the most, they turn out to be the ones who hurt you the most. I was angry, yes, but deeper than that. I was hurt, not just for me, but for my family, for the life I had promised them, for the quiet stability we had built together. I wanted to protect it, preserve it, hold on to it no matter what. And that's when I started thinking about proof, about keeping track of everything, about making sure that if the worst happened, I would have a way to fight back, not with fists, not with anger, but with truth. Because truth is stronger than humiliation, stronger than betrayal, and stronger than the fear that settles in your chest when you feel powerless. I didn't know it yet, but this quiet preparation, this careful collection of evidence, would be what saved me later. When the world tried to crush me, when they tried to make me feel small, I would have the one thing they could never take: proof. And with that proof, I would reclaim not just my dignity, but my voice, and ultimately, my life. The morning started like any other, but I could feel the tension the second I stepped into the office. Something about the air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on my shoulders before I even reached my desk. The fluorescent lights flickered just a little, and I caught the reflection of my own eyes in the window by the lobby. They looked tired, wary. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just one of those mornings. But then it started. The whispers. Not loud, not obvious. Just small, clipped words, quick exchanges that stopped when I turned around. I saw Mark, the guy who had been hired 6 months ago, smirking at something on his screen. And then our manager, Mr. Walters, walked past, patting Mark on the back in a way that made it obvious who he favored. My stomach sank. I had a sinking feeling, the kind that comes before a storm, the one you can't ignore. By 10 o'clock, it had begun in earnest. A meeting in the main conference room. I thought it was about the quarterly project update. I thought I was prepared. I had charts, notes, reports, all the evidence I needed to show I had been leading the project successfully. But I hadn't expected the ambush. I walked in, and the room went silent. It wasn't the usual polite silence of co-workers focusing. It was the quiet before the storm. Mr. Walters stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, a smirk on his face that made my blood run cold. "John," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "we need to talk about your role on the Thompson account." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Of course, sir. I've got the reports ready. Everything's on track, timelines, deliverables." He cut me off. "Actually, we've decided to move someone else into that role. Someone who's shown more initiative, more leadership potential." The words hit me like a punch. I froze. My mouth went dry. My mind scrambled to catch up, to understand. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Mark," Walters said, turning to the young guy beside him. "You'll be taking over John's responsibilities from today onward. We think it's the best move for the team." I couldn't believe it. Not only had I been passed over, humiliated in front of everyone, but it had been orchestrated like a performance. Everyone in the room, the co-workers I had trusted, the friends I thought I had, sat there, watching. Smiles, neutral faces, and a few trying too hard expressions of sympathy. But I could see through them. They were all in on it. I swallowed hard, feeling my chest tighten. I don't understand. I've been leading this project for months. All the work, the client meetings, the reports. I've been doing all of it. What changed? Walters didn't answer. He just smiled. A small, patronizing smile, like he was teaching a child a lesson. Sometimes leadership is about more than hard work, John. It's about potential. And we feel Mark has the potential we're looking for. I wanted to explode. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw every piece of paper in the room across the table. But I didn't. I just nodded slowly, my heart racing, my hands trembling slightly as I turned and walked out of the conference room. Back at my desk, I sat down and stared at the screen. The reports I had worked on, the presentations I had perfected, the emails I had written, all of it now seemed meaningless. And yet, I had proof. I had been meticulous in saving every email, every chat, every sign that they were undermining me. They thought they were clever, that they could humiliate me without consequences. But I had been preparing for this. And I also felt something else, fear. Not for myself, not really, but for my family. For Maria, for Sam, for Lily. I didn't want them to see me crushed, defeated. I wanted to protect them from this storm, even though it felt like the world had conspired against me. The next few days were even worse. Every meeting became a reminder of my humiliation. Every glance, every casual remark, every joke in the break room felt like it was directed at me. I overheard colleagues saying things like, "Well, John just wasn't cutting it," or "Mark's more ambitious." And it wasn't just Mark or Walters. It was a few of the people I thought were friends, the ones who had always smiled at my ideas, nodded along in meetings. They were all part of it, all complicit in my quiet destruction. At home, I tried to keep my frustration hidden. I played the role of the calm, collected father and husband. I helped Sam with his homework, read Lily bedtime stories, made dinner with Maria. But inside, I was boiling. Every night, I sat by the window, staring at the city lights, feeling trapped between anger and despair. I questioned everything, my choices, my loyalty, my worth. And then came the tipping point. An email, sent by Walters, but clearly edited and orchestrated by someone else, accusing me of errors in the Thompson account. Errors I hadn't made. Mistakes that were fabricated, but written in formal language, enough to make anyone doubt themselves. I read it, my hands shaking, my stomach in knots. They weren't just taking the promotion. They were trying to ruin my reputation, erase the work I had done, make me look incompetent in front of the entire company. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't send a furious email. I didn't storm into their office. I sat down, took a deep breath, and pulled up my files. Every report, every email chain, every document. And I realized something. I wasn't powerless. I had the truth on my side. The next week, I started quietly compiling everything. Not as revenge, not as anger, but as armor. Evidence that proved what I had known all along, that I had been betrayed, undermined, and humiliated. Every misstep, every favoritism, every false accusation, I documented it all. And as I did, I started to feel a strange sense of calm. The more I organized the evidence, the more I realized that their power over me was only as strong as my silence. And then came the confrontation. Not planned, not dramatic, but inevitable. Walters called me into his office one afternoon, expecting me to apologize, to grovel, to accept my place as the loser in their little corporate game. But I didn't. I walked in, calm, collected, and laid everything out. Emails, screenshots, timelines, examples of favoritism, instances of Mark taking credit for my work. Every detail, every lie, every hidden betrayal. Their faces changed as I spoke. Walters went from smirk to disbelief. Mark's confidence faltered. The coworkers who had watched my humiliation looked away, unable to maintain their fake smiles. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: power. Not the power they had promised in a title or a promotion. Real power. The power of truth, of integrity, of not letting betrayal define me. After the meeting, I walked back to my desk. No celebration. No gloating. Just quiet. Relief, yes. Satisfaction, yes. But mostly a strange calm. Like the storm had passed, and I was still standing, intact. And that night, at home, I held Maria and the kids a little tighter. I told them nothing about the confrontation. I didn't need to. They already knew. They already felt the weight of it in my silence, in the tension I had carried for weeks. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Because betrayal is terrible, yes. Humiliation is painful, but it doesn't have to break you. It doesn't have to define you. And sometimes, the very people who try to crush you are the ones who show you the strength you never knew you had. After the confrontation, I thought I'd feel lighter. I thought the tension, the anxiety, the anger, everything would lift. But it didn't. Not completely. Not yet. In fact, the weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Every morning, I woke up with a pit in my stomach. Even with proof in my hands, even after standing up to Walters and Mark, there was this lingering sense of vulnerability, of exposure. I kept thinking about what they had done, about how easily my work, my effort, my time, could be overlooked, misrepresented, or stolen. It wasn't just a promotion. It wasn't just a project. It was trust. My trust. And it had been shattered. Walking into the office felt different now. The space that had once felt like an extension of my effort, a place where I could grow, now felt like a minefield. Every glance seemed suspicious. Every conversation had a hidden meaning, and every laugh in the break room sounded hollow. Even when people tried to act normal, I couldn't help but feel the weight of their judgment. I started withdrawing. Not openly, not dramatically, but quietly. I stopped volunteering for projects. I stopped going to lunch with colleagues. I stopped sharing my thoughts in meetings. I became a shadow in my own life, walking through the motions, performing the tasks expected of me without ever feeling their satisfaction. At home, it was different. I tried to shield my family, to maintain a calm front. I wanted to laugh with Sam, to tuck Lily in at night, to smile at Maria and pretend nothing had changed. But the sadness clung to me, heavy and constant. There were nights I sat in the living room long after the kids were asleep, staring at the city lights through our window, feeling the weight of everything I had lost. And it wasn't just the office. I started questioning myself, my decisions, my worth. I wondered if I had missed something, if I had been naive, if I had been blind to the people around me. I thought about the sacrifices I had made, the weekends I skipped, the overtime hours, the birthdays and little moments I had given up, and I felt a quiet rage, not at them, but at myself for trusting the wrong people. Sleep became difficult. Some nights, I would wake up drenched in sweat, replaying moments in my head. The meeting where Walters announced the promotion, the look on Mark's face, the smirks of my colleagues. Sometimes, I'd imagine it differently. Sometimes, I'd imagine myself shouting, standing up, storming out. But when I woke up, it was the same reality, unchanged. I started noticing the small cracks in myself. I would snap at minor inconveniences. I lost patience with people who hadn't done anything wrong. I found myself holding grudges over little things. I felt lonely, even in crowded rooms. And worst of all, I felt guilty for feeling this way. Guilty for letting the betrayal hurt me so deeply, for letting it touch the quiet, sacred life I had built with my family. Maria noticed, of course. She always does. One evening, she asked gently, "John, you've been quiet. More than usual. Are you okay?" I wanted to tell her everything, to spill the hurt, the fear, the sadness that had been eating me alive for weeks. But I didn't. I just shook my head and smiled. "I'm fine," I said, and went to the bedroom. But I wasn't fine. I was unraveling. Slowly, quietly. I felt like I was drowning in a pool of humiliation, self-doubt, and sorrow. The promotion, the betrayal, the favoritism, it had taken more from me than I realized. Not just my career, not just my ego, but a piece of my confidence, a piece of my joy. Work became a blur. I would sit at my desk, staring at my computer, typing emails without focus, attending meetings without engagement. I watched Mark take the credit I had earned, Walter's smile as if nothing had happened, and the colleagues who had witnessed my humiliation continue on as if I was invisible. Every moment chipped away at me, a little more, a little deeper. And yet, life went on. Sam had a school recital, Lily learned a new song. Maria made her famous lasagna on Friday night. I smiled, I applauded, I pretended that everything was okay. But at night, when the apartment was quiet, I would feel the weight of all the things unsaid, all the things unfair, all the things I couldn't fix. I remember one night in particular. I sat in the dark, the city lights painting faint shadows across the living room. I held a cup of coffee, staring into it, not drinking, just staring. I thought about my father, who had worked his whole life to provide for us. I thought about the sacrifices I had made, the moments I had given up, the dreams I had postponed. And I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. Quietly, in the stillness, letting it all out. It was a strange kind of sorrow. Not anger, not despair entirely, but the deep ache of betrayal and loss. The quiet knowledge that life could be cruel even when you tried your best. And in that moment, I realized something else. That this pain, as sharp and bitter as it was mine. I couldn't let it define me, but I also couldn't ignore it. I had to sit with it, understand it, and carry it with me. Over the next weeks, I tried to rebuild. Not my career, not yet, but myself. I started small. A morning jog before work. A quiet walk with Maria after dinner. listening to Sam talk about his day without interruption, laughing with Lily when she told me a silly story. Little things, simple things, that reminded me that life wasn't just the betrayal, the humiliation, or the office politics. Life was also this: family, love, small victories, moments of connection. And even in my darkest moments, even when I felt the despair pressing down on me, I realized something essential. Resilience isn't loud. It doesn't roar. It grows quietly, in the cracks, in the pain, in the slow accumulation of small acts of courage. Every morning, I forced myself to wake up. Every time I smiled for my kids. Every moment I refused to give in to anger. That was resilience. That was strength. I started to see things differently, too. I began to notice who in my life was genuine, who truly cared, and who didn't. The betrayal had been devastating, yes, but it had also been clarifying. It had stripped away pretenses, illusions, and facades. And in that clarity, I started to rebuild the foundation I had thought was lost. But it wasn't easy. There were nights when the tears came again. Nights when the anger bubbled beneath the surface. Nights when I questioned everything: my decisions, my path, my worth. But each morning, I forced myself to rise, to face the day, to hold on to the small things that mattered. And slowly, very slowly, I began to feel a sense of control return. I began writing things down, journaling my thoughts, my fears, my reflections. Not for anyone else, not to prove anything. Just for me. To remind myself that I was still here, still capable, still human. That even in the depths of despair, even after humiliation and betrayal, life went on. And I could survive it. One night, after Sam had fallen asleep and Lily was curled up beside Maria, I sat by the window with a pen and notebook. I wrote about the office, about the betrayal, about the way it made me feel small and powerless. But I also wrote about the strength I found in my family, the moments of love, the quiet victories, the hope that someday things would be different. That hope was fragile, yes, but it was there. And sometimes, fragile hope is all you need to begin healing. I realized then that the fall, the despair, the heartbreak, they weren't the end. They were a part of the journey, a necessary part. Because without experiencing the depth of the pain, I could never fully appreciate the strength, the clarity, and the resilience that lay within me. And so, I carried on. Quietly, humbly, painfully, but with purpose. I allowed myself to feel the hurt, to sit in it, to understand it. And in that understanding, I began to reclaim a sense of self, a sense of dignity, a sense of life beyond the betrayal. The emotional fall had been devastating. It had shaken me to my core. It had made me question everything I thought I knew about people, work, trust, and loyalty. But it had also taught me something invaluable. That even in the darkest times, even when it feels like everything has been taken from you, there is a way forward. A way to heal. A way to rise. A way to find yourself again. And that, I realized in the quiet hours of the night, staring at the city lights and holding the pen in my hand, was the most important lesson of all. It was during one of those quiet nights that the first twist came. Not dramatic, not sudden, just a quiet, almost invisible shift in perspective. I was sitting at the kitchen table after everyone had gone to bed. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. My notebook was open, filled with my thoughts, my frustrations, my sorrow. I had spent weeks cataloging every insult, every betrayal, every moment I had been wronged. And then I realized something. All this time, I had been fighting the wrong battle. Not against Walters, not against Mark, not even against the colleagues who had laughed at me or ignored me. I had been fighting against myself, against my own fear, my own self-doubt, my own need for validation. I had believed that getting recognition, getting the promotion, proving myself to the world would fix everything. But it wouldn't. It couldn't. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of that realization settle over me. It was uncomfortable, almost painful, but it was liberating at the same time. I had been searching for justice in the wrong places. I had been trying to reclaim something external, approval, recognition, status, when what I really needed was internal. Validation for myself. Trust in my own worth, my own effort, my own integrity. The next morning, I went to work with a different mindset. Not anger, not revenge, not even hope for recognition. Just clarity. I started looking at the office differently, not as a battlefield, but as a mirror. Every interaction, every whispered comment, every smile or smirk told me more about the people around me than about me. And what it told me was clear. I had been expecting loyalty and fairness from people who were incapable of giving it. I started making small choices differently. I stopped seeking approval from Walters. I stopped worrying about Mark's every move. I focused on the work itself, on doing my best, quietly, without the need for applause. And strangely, that shift made a difference. The weight I had been carrying began to lift, just a little. I wasn't powerless anymore, not because the situation had changed, but because I had. And then something else happened, something I hadn't expected. One of the colleagues who had seemed complicit in my humiliation came to me quietly. It was Sarah, someone I had always respected for her honesty. She said, "John, I know what they did. I didn't say anything at the time, but I've been watching. And I want you to know, you're not the problem here. They are." Her words were simple, but they hit me like a bomb. Validation didn't have to come from the office hierarchy. It didn't have to come from the people who had betrayed me. Sometimes, it came from unexpected sources, from those who had integrity and courage, from those who saw the truth even when it was inconvenient to admit. I started to see patterns I hadn't noticed before. Walters had always favored those who flattered him, who were willing to step on others to get ahead. Mark wasn't malicious, not really, just naive and eager, willing to accept credit when it was offered. The colleagues who had laughed and whispered, they were insecure, afraid, trying to survive in a system that rewarded cunning over honesty. It was a hard truth to accept, but it was freeing. Understanding that their betrayal was about them, not me, took away a lot of the pain. I realized that their actions didn't define my worth, my effort, or my integrity. They were a reflection of their own flaws, their own fears, their own ambitions. And once I saw it that way, I could finally stop carrying their weight. At home, I began to open up more, too. I told Maria about these thoughts, about how I was learning to separate myself from the pain, how I was beginning to see the truth in a different light. She listened, holding my hand, nodding, offering small reassurances. And in those quiet moments, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Not complete, not perfect, but real, tangible. I started focusing on what I could control: my work, my family, my own choices. I began setting boundaries, refusing to let office politics dictate my mood, my energy, or my happiness. I stopped trying to impress Walters. I stopped worrying about Mark. I focused on producing work I could be proud of, and quietly, without fanfare, I found satisfaction in that. One afternoon, months later, I found myself in the same conference room where the humiliation had occurred. Walters was presenting a new project plan. I listened, contributed, but I didn't feel the old anxiety, the old fear. I realized I could be present without being consumed by the past. The office hadn't changed. The people hadn't changed. But I had. And that made all the difference. The real twist, I realized, wasn't external at all. It was internal. The promotion, the recognition, the proof, they were never enough to heal the pain. The real power, the real freedom, came from understanding myself, my own values, my own worth. From seeing the betrayal for what it was, and not letting it define me. And with that realization came unexpected clarity about my family. I started appreciating them more deeply, not as anchors to calm me, but as mirrors reflecting the strength I already possessed. Sam's curiosity, Lily's laughter, Maria's quiet wisdom. They reminded me who I was beneath the hurt, beneath the anger, beneath the humiliation. I didn't need to prove myself to the world. I just needed to be present, honest, and authentic with the people who mattered most. I began noticing small changes in myself. I laughed more freely, without forcing it. I spoke up in meetings, not to prove something, but to contribute meaningfully. I noticed how much energy I had been wasting on resentment, and I consciously chose to let it go. Not completely, not overnight, but little by little. I also began reaching out to colleagues differently, not with resentment, not with accusation, but with kindness, with curiosity. I tried to understand their perspectives, their pressures, their fears. It didn't make the betrayal any less real, but it allowed me to reclaim my own sense of agency. And in that process, I discovered something profound. Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing bad behavior. It doesn't mean pretending the betrayal didn't happen. It means freeing yourself from the control of someone else's actions. It means refusing to let their choices dictate your happiness, your confidence, or your future. I began writing again, in my notebook, but now differently. Not a catalog of grievances or a record of proof, but reflections, lessons, insights. I wrote about the humility of the fall, the clarity of the twist, the quiet victories of reclaiming myself. I wrote about resilience, about patience, about understanding, about the power of standing firm in who you are, even when the world tries to pull you down. And slowly, I felt lighter. Not because the office had changed, not because Walters had apologized, not because Mark had acknowledged my contributions, but because I had changed. Because I had realized that my worth wasn't determined by external validation, by promotions, or by recognition. My worth was inherent, grounded in my effort, my values, my relationships, my integrity. That realization became a turning point in my life. I stopped dwelling on what I had lost. I stopped measuring myself against the ambitions of others. I focused on the things I could nurture, my skills, my family, my own growth. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Real, tangible hope. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments when old fears crept back, moments when I doubted myself. But each time, I reminded myself of the truth I had discovered. The world can betray you. People can humiliate you. Circumstances can challenge you. But your inner strength, your integrity, your capacity for growth, that is untouchable. The twist, the realization, wasn't just about work or betrayal. It was about life, about seeing clearly, about understanding that suffering isn't meaningless. It teaches, clarifies, and sometimes transforms. I had been humbled, hurt, and humiliated, but I had also been awakened, reminded of what really matters. And in that quiet awakening, I began to reclaim not just my professional life, but my life as a whole. Not with anger, not with revenge, not with resentment, but with calm, steady clarity. The kind of clarity that doesn't need applause, that doesn't need validation, that doesn't need anyone to recognize it but you. Because once I understood that, I realized something even more important. The world could still try to humiliate me. People could still betray me. But nothing could take away the life I chose to live, the love I chose to give, the integrity I chose to uphold, and the man I chose to be. And that, more than any promotion or recognition, more than any proof or victory, was the real triumph. After the realization hit me, life didn't suddenly become easy. Change never works that way. The clarity I had gained was powerful, yes, but the world around me hadn't shifted. Walters was still Walters. Mark was still Mark. The office politics, the whispered remarks, the sideways glances, they were still there. But I had shifted. I had found a lens to see through it. And with that lens came a quiet strength I had never known before. I began with small steps. Not big, dramatic gestures, but tiny, deliberate actions that reminded me I was in control of my own life. I started waking up a little earlier, just enough to drink my coffee in silence, to feel the morning sun on my face. I walked the kids to school when I could, noticing the little things they said. The way Sam would talk about a science experiment, or Lily would hum a song she had learned in preschool. I started listening in a way I hadn't before, really hearing them, not just glancing and nodding while my mind raced with the worries of the day. At work, I focused differently. I stopped trying to prove myself. I stopped seeking approval from those who had failed to see me. Instead, I focused on the quality of my work and the relationships I could trust. I took on projects, yes, but not to show anyone. I did it because I knew I could do them well, because I wanted to do them well. And strangely, this quiet dedication drew attention, but in a different way. Not the kind that fed my ego, but the kind that reminded me that competence and integrity matter. They always do. Maria noticed the change before anyone else. She would smile at me across the dinner table, noticing the lightness in my step, the calm in my voice, the patience I now carried with the kids. And I noticed her too, in ways I hadn't before. I realized how much she had been carrying quietly, supporting me without complaint, holding the family together while I wrestled with the storm at work. I started helping more than before, not just with chores, but with emotional support, with listening, with being present. It was a partnership renewed, strengthened in the quiet aftermath of pain. I began documenting everything differently too. My notebook, once filled with proof and grievances, now contained reflections, insights, plans, and gratitude. I wrote about the lessons of betrayal, yes, but also about the moments of connection, the small victories, the ways I could improve myself as a father, husband, and human being. Writing became my anchor, a place to process emotions before they overwhelmed me. And then came the day I confronted Mark, not aggressively, not with anger, but calmly. We had been assigned to collaborate on a new project. I could have avoided him, ignored him, held a grudge. But instead, I approached him directly. "Mark," I said, "I know what happened before. I don't hold it against you, but I want us to work together respectfully. Can we do that?" He looked surprised, a little guilty. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I think we can." That small acknowledgement, it didn't erase the past, but it opened a door. It reminded me that sometimes confrontation isn't about winning. It's about honesty, about setting boundaries, about refusing to let resentment rule your life. The project went smoothly. I noticed that working with Mark, even after the past, was easier than I expected. He contributed, I contributed, and together we achieved results that neither of us could have alone. I realized something profound. Letting go of anger doesn't make you weak, it makes you free. Free to collaborate, free to move forward, free to live without the constant weight of the past. At home, I started small traditions again. Saturday mornings were pancakes and cartoons. Sunday walks became sacred. Bedtime stories turned into discussions about life, curiosity, and imagination. I began noticing the ways Sam and Lily were growing, their personalities, their quirks, their dreams. And in seeing them, I began seeing myself. Not the crushed, humiliated version, but the man who had endured, reflected, and begun to rebuild. I also started paying attention to the little victories at work. Walter still had his favoritism. Mark still had his ambition. But I didn't need recognition from them anymore. I found satisfaction in the small things. An email from a client thanking me for clarity in a report, a colleague quietly acknowledging my effort, finishing a project I could be proud of. Those moments, subtle and understated, became more valuable than any promotion or title ever could. And then, slowly, other doors opened. Opportunities one hadn't considered before began to appear. Offers to lead small initiatives, invitations to collaborate with teams outside my department, even casual mentorship from someone higher up who respected my approach and integrity. I realized that the humiliation, the betrayal, the struggle, they had prepared me for something bigger. Not by giving me recognition, but by forcing me to build resilience, perspective, and self-trust. I also learned the art of boundaries. I stopped overcommitting. I stopped trying to please everyone. I focused on what mattered, my work, my family, my growth. I began to say no when it was necessary, not aggressively, but firmly, with respect. And with that, I felt a lightness I hadn't known for months. My energy returned. My confidence returned. My sense of agency returned. One evening, Maria and I sat on the balcony, Sam asleep in his bed, Lily curled up with a storybook. I told her quietly, "I think I'm finally seeing things clearly. I think I'm finally starting to live instead of just surviving." She smiled, squeezing my hand, and I realized that this calm, quiet connection, this shared resilience, was worth more than any career milestone, any recognition, any victory in the office. I began noticing patterns I hadn't seen before. I realized that betrayal doesn't just test you, it teaches you. It shows you who is real, who is supportive, and who isn't. It shows you your own limits, your own strengths, and your own capacity to endure. And it shows you what truly matters: love, integrity, patience, and quiet courage. I also started mentoring others in subtle ways. Not to assert power, not to prove myself, but to pass on lessons learned the hard way. A junior colleague struggling with office politics. A teammate unsure how to navigate favoritism. I shared what I could, gently, without judgment. And in doing so, I felt a sense of purpose return. One that had nothing to do with promotions or recognition, and everything to do with human connection and guidance. As weeks turned into months, the office slowly felt less hostile. I had my own rhythm, my own space, my own approach. Walter still had his games, Mark still had his ambition, but they no longer controlled me. I had reclaimed the power they had tried to take, not through confrontation or revenge, but through quiet resilience, reflection, and the choice to live according to my values. And at home, life flourished. Sam learned to ride his bike without training wheels. Lily sang her first full song in the school recital. Maria and I celebrated small victories together. A completed project, a promotion in a department that genuinely appreciated effort, a quiet weekend where nothing happened, but we felt full. I realized something essential. Life isn't about avoiding betrayal or humiliation. It's about how you respond when it happens. About the choices you make in its aftermath. About the people you nurture, the love you give, the integrity you maintain, and the quiet strength you develop. The rebuilding process wasn't instantaneous. It took months, careful reflection, countless small decisions, and conscious effort. But each step, no matter how small, added up. And eventually, I felt whole again. Not the same as before, not naive, not untested, but stronger, wiser, and more centered. I began to see that life's struggles aren't punishments. They're lessons. They're mirrors reflecting our resilience, patience, and values. And the more you embrace them, the more you grow. The more you understand that control isn't about controlling others. It's about controlling your own responses, your own perspective, and your own heart. And that, I realized one quiet evening as I watched Sam and Lily play in the living room, was more valuable than any promotion, any title, any recognition I had ever sought. More valuable than proving anyone wrong. More valuable than revenge. The real victory, I understood, was living fully, loving deeply, and moving forward with clarity, integrity, and calm. By the time part 7 begins, life had begun to settle into a rhythm I hadn't known in months. The storm of betrayal and humiliation was behind me, but the work of rebuilding wasn't finished. Strength doesn't come suddenly. It grows quietly, layer by layer, in choices made over time, in the way you respond to the ordinary and extraordinary alike. It started with small reconciliations. Not dramatic apologies or explosive confrontations, but quiet, intentional efforts to heal the lingering tensions around me. I realized that holding grudges didn't protect me. It only kept me chained to the past. And if I wanted to move forward fully, I had to find ways to release that weight. One afternoon, Mark approached me at my desk. His usual confident stride was replaced with hesitation, almost uncertainty. He said, "Hey, John, I wanted to say, I really respect how you've handled everything. I know I made mistakes, and I just wanted to acknowledge it." It was awkward, yes, but genuine. And instead of brushing it off or holding resentment, I nodded and said, "Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. Let's just focus on doing good work together, okay?" That simple exchange felt monumental. It wasn't about proving I was right or making him admit wrong. It was about reclaiming my peace, acknowledging the humanity in others, and refusing to let bitterness linger. In that moment, I realized reconciliation wasn't about them. It was about me. About freeing myself from the prison of anger and resentment. At home, I focused on deepening connections with my family. I began taking the time to truly listen, not just hear, but absorb what Sam and Lily were saying. Sam shared stories about his friends, his small triumphs and frustrations at school. I listened without interrupting, without immediately offering solutions. I just heard him. And in that listening, I realized that I had been missing these moments for months while consumed with office battles. Lily, too, noticed the difference. She started bringing me her drawings, her little stories, her imaginary adventures, and I responded with enthusiasm, questions, and engagement. These were small acts, yes, but they strengthened bonds that had been quietly strained by my stress and distraction. I learned that nurturing relationships wasn't grand gestures. It was the accumulation of small, deliberate, present choices. I also began noticing my own growth. I could feel a quiet confidence returning, a sense of self not dependent on recognition, promotion, or approval. I realized that the humiliation I had suffered had been painful, but it had taught me an invaluable lesson. The world might try to tear you down, but you always have the choice of how you respond. With that clarity, I started taking initiatives at work differently. I volunteered for projects, not for praise, but for learning. I offered guidance to colleagues quietly, mentoring those who asked for help without trying to prove myself. And in doing so, I began to notice something extraordinary: respect. Genuine respect. Not the kind that comes from titles or favoritism, but the kind that comes from integrity, consistency, and quiet competence. Walters, of course, continued his games. He still favored some and overlooked others. But I was no longer caught in the web of his manipulation. I had created boundaries, learned to focus on my sphere of influence, and realized that trying to control his actions was pointless. Instead, I focused on my own work, my own growth, my own standards. And that focus brought results that I could measure, appreciate, and take pride in, results that no one could steal or diminish. One evening, I found myself reflecting on the months that had passed, the humiliation, the betrayal, the despair, and now this quiet empowerment. I realized that the turning point had been entirely internal. The change hadn't come from external recognition or apologies. It had come from within. I had discovered resilience I didn't know I had, patience I hadn't cultivated, and a sense of clarity that was stronger than any promotion could provide. I also began to notice the power of perspective. The very colleagues who had once laughed or whispered behind my back were now, in some cases, allies, in some cases indifferent. But none of them held the power over me that they once did. The humiliation had passed. The fear had passed. And with that, I could finally focus on what mattered. My family, my integrity, my growth, and my own happiness. I started setting more boundaries at home, too. Not in a cold or distant way, but in a mindful way. I made space for Maria and me to reconnect as partners, not just parents. I carved out time to engage with Sam and Lily meaningfully, creating moments of presence that were free from distraction. And in doing so, I realized that life wasn't just about surviving hardship. It was about creating joy deliberately, patiently, and authentically. I also began noticing how the lessons of betrayal applied beyond work. In life, people will disappoint. Circumstances will test you. Plans will fail. And if you let them, these challenges can define you. But they don't have to. You can reclaim your power, not by controlling others, but by controlling yourself, your reactions, your perspective, your values. One weekend, I took the kids to the park. It was a simple outing, but it felt profound. Sam ran ahead, full of energy and excitement. Lily skipped alongside me, laughing at a joke I made. Maria followed with a quiet smile. I watched them, feeling a sense of peace and gratitude that I hadn't felt in a long time. The office, the humiliation, the betrayal, they were still there, yes. But they were no longer controlling me. My life had shifted. I also found myself sharing my story in small ways. Not to boast, not to seek sympathy, but to connect, to guide, to help others who might be experiencing similar pain. A colleague confided in me about feeling overlooked. A friend asked for advice about workplace politics. I shared what I had learned. Focus on what you can control, nurture the people who matter, and always maintain your integrity. It was remarkable how much lighter it made me feel, helping others while reinforcing my own perspective. Work itself became more fulfilling. I stopped chasing promotions or recognition. I focused on the projects that mattered, that allowed me to contribute meaningfully, that let me demonstrate my capabilities quietly but effectively. And in that focus, I began to notice something subtle but powerful. Confidence returned naturally. Respect followed naturally. And the sense of inner peace, the calm, quiet empowerment, grew steadily, imperceptibly at first, then undeniably. I also began reflecting on the role of forgiveness, not as an act toward others, but as an act toward myself. Forgiving Walters, forgiving Mark, forgiving the colleagues who had whispered behind my back, it wasn't about excusing them. It wasn't about pretending nothing had happened. It was about freeing myself from their control. The anger, the resentment, the fear, they were heavy burdens, and forgiveness allowed me to set them down. I realized that life's true victories aren't about getting even or being recognized. They're about reclaiming yourself. They're about living deliberately, authentically, with integrity and calm. And when you do that, even in the face of betrayal and humiliation, you create a life that is unshakable, regardless of what others do or say. By the end of Part 7, I had reached a point I never thought possible months earlier. I wasn't seeking revenge. I wasn't looking for recognition. I wasn't letting the past define me. I had reclaimed my time, my energy, my relationships, my integrity, and my perspective. And that, I realized, was the most profound form of empowerment. The journey wasn't complete. Life never is. But I had discovered the truth of resilience. It isn't loud. It isn't flashy. It isn't immediate. It's quiet, persistent, patient, and unwavering. And once you discover it, once you anchor yourself in it, you realize that no one, no betrayal, no failure can take it away from you. Even with the quiet empowerment I had found, life didn't pause. Challenges continued to appear. Not dramatic, sudden betrayals, but subtle tests, moments that revealed how far I had really come. It was in these quiet, unassuming moments that I realized true strength wasn't about surviving the big storm. It was about navigating the small, everyday trials without losing yourself. Work remained an ongoing challenge. Walters was still Walters, his favoritism obvious, his manipulation subtle but persistent. Mark was more careful now, and our working relationship had stabilized, but there were still tensions beneath the surface. I noticed moments when colleagues tried to draw me into conflicts, moments when office politics could have pulled me back into anger or resentment. But I had learned something important. I could observe without reacting. I could engage without being consumed. That clarity made all the difference. I remember a meeting where Walters presented a new initiative. The same old pattern was unfolding, credit being subtly diverted, certain voices elevated, and my contributions minimized. In the past, I would have felt anger rising, a familiar mix of frustration and hurt. This time I paused. I counted to 10 quietly in my mind, reminded myself of my worth, and chose my words carefully. I contributed to the discussion calmly, confidently, without needing to assert dominance or prove my value. And something remarkable happened. My colleagues listened. Walters noticed. But the difference wasn't in recognition. It was in my calm authority, the quiet presence that spoke louder than any words could. At home, life demanded attention in ways that reminded me of what truly mattered. Sam was growing more independent, yet still needed guidance. Lily's curiosity blossomed, and her questions challenged me to think in ways I hadn't in years. Maria, as always, was my anchor, my confidant, my partner in navigating the chaos of work, parenting, and life. And I realized that the time and emotional energy I invested at home now were paying dividends in a way no promotion or recognition could ever match. One evening, I sat with Sam as he struggled with a school project. I could feel his frustration, the disappointment of not getting it right the first time. I remembered my own struggles, the humiliation I had endured, and I said softly, "It's okay to mess up. What matters is what you do after. You learn, you try again, and you get better." His eyes brightened. "Really?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Really." And I saw in that moment that my own growth, my own resilience, was rippling outward, touching the people I loved most. I also confronted moments of self-doubt head-on. Late at night, after the kids were asleep and Maria was reading quietly, I would replay the events of the past months in my mind. Sometimes, doubts crept in. Did I handle it right? Could I have done more? Am I really growing? Or just pretending? I learned to observe these thoughts without judgment, to acknowledge them, and then let them pass. I realized that self-awareness wasn't about eliminating doubt. It was about learning to coexist with it without letting it control your actions. Work brought another subtle challenge. A project I had led quietly for months was suddenly in the spotlight. Walters tried to take credit in subtle ways. Colleagues whispered behind the scenes, speculating about recognition, favor, and politics. I felt the old anxiety rising, a familiar weight on my chest. But I paused. I reminded myself of everything I had learned. My worth wasn't defined by accolades. My peace wasn't tied to approval, and my integrity was mine to maintain, no matter what. So I addressed it calmly. I shared updates with the team, acknowledged contributions fairly, and subtly highlighted my role without drama or defensiveness. The result was unexpected. The project was recognized for its quality, and the acknowledgement was genuine. Not because I demanded it, not because I schemed for it, but because I had remained consistent, professional, and calm. That moment reinforced a truth I had learned slowly over months. Results speak louder than anger, resentment, or gamesmanship. At home, I noticed subtle transformations as well. Maria confided more openly, trusting that I was present not just physically, but emotionally. Sam came to me with his problems, seeking guidance without fear of judgment. Lily shared her imagination freely, knowing her ideas would be heard and valued. These moments reminded me daily that relationships are strengthened not by perfection, but by consistency, presence, and empathy. I also began to understand the nature of resilience more deeply. It wasn't just enduring hardship, it was recognizing your own growth in real time, appreciating the small victories, and maintaining integrity even when no one is watching. I realized that the humiliation I had suffered, the betrayal I had endured, and the despair I had felt were all part of a larger lesson. True strength comes from self-mastery, from choosing your reactions, and from maintaining dignity in a world that often tries to test it. I started observing people differently too. Walter's actions no longer felt personal. Mark's mistakes no longer frustrated me. Colleagues who whispered or speculated no longer drained my energy. I saw patterns, motivations, weaknesses, and strengths, but none of it affected my core sense of self. That observation, that clarity, became a tool, a way to navigate challenges without letting them derail me emotionally. One particularly challenging moment arose when a new team member joined the project, and the office dynamics shifted unpredictably. Rumors began circulating, alliances subtly forming and breaking, and the familiar tension returned. I could have panicked. I could have engaged in the games. But I didn't. I observed, I contributed, I stayed consistent, and I maintained professionalism. Slowly, the environment stabilized, and I noticed a quiet respect forming. Not out of fear, not out of manipulation, but out of calm competence and integrity. I also began reflecting more deeply on my own life outside of work. I realized how much time I had spent chasing approval, recognition, and validation from external sources, and how little energy I had devoted to cultivating my own values, my own peace, and my own relationships. I made a conscious choice to shift that balance, to invest first in what mattered most: family, personal growth, and emotional clarity. This new approach had unexpected benefits. I started waking up with purpose, not dread. I started evenings with intention, not exhaustion. I approached challenges with curiosity, not fear. And slowly, a quiet confidence emerged, one that didn't need recognition, applause, or validation. It was self-sustaining, grounded in integrity, patience, and deliberate action. I began noticing moments of grace I had missed before: the laughter of my children, the quiet support of my spouse, the unexpected kindness of colleagues, the simple beauty of ordinary days. These moments reminded me that life wasn't just about surviving crises. It was about appreciating resilience, connection, and presence. And yet, I also remained realistic. Life was not perfect. Office politics, human flaws, and unforeseen challenges would continue to appear. But I no longer feared them. I had learned that my power lay not in controlling the world, but in controlling myself, my reactions, and my perspective. And that knowledge, more than anything else, made me feel whole again. I also began sharing my reflections in subtle ways, mentoring those who faced struggles similar to mine. I shared lessons about resilience, perspective, and integrity, not as lectures, but as conversations. And in doing so, I realized that helping others navigate challenges also reinforced my own growth, deepening my understanding and appreciation of the journey I had endured. By the end of Part 8, I had reached a stage of quiet self-mastery. Challenges still arose, yes, but they no longer threatened my peace. I had faced humiliation, betrayal, and despair, and emerged not just surviving, but thriving in a calm, steady, and deliberate way. I had learned to separate myself from the toxicity around me, to focus on what I could control, and to nurture what truly mattered. And in that realization, I understood something fundamental. Life will always present challenges. People will betray, disappoint, and test you. But your response, the calm, deliberate choice to act with integrity, to nurture your relationships, to maintain perspective, and to stay true to yourself, that is where real power lies. I had discovered the quiet strength that comes from self-awareness, resilience, and deliberate action. And with that strength, I was ready for whatever came next, not with fear, not with anger, but with calm, steady confidence, and a deep understanding of what truly matters in life. By the time Part 9 begins, I had reached a place of quiet stability in my life. The storm of humiliation and betrayal that had once consumed me was no longer dictating my days. Yet, life, as always, had more lessons to teach. These lessons came not as dramatic upheavals, but as subtle turning points, moments where I realized how far I had come and how much further I could grow. One morning, I arrived at work earlier than usual. The office was quiet, almost serene. I had a chance to reflect before the day began in earnest. I thought about the months that had passed, the anger, the humiliation, the endless anxiety, and I realized that I had changed fundamentally. The fear and resentment that had once controlled me were now distant memories. In their place was a calm clarity, a quiet confidence that had been hard-earned, forged in the crucible of experience. That morning, Walters called me into a meeting. My first instinct was to brace for criticism or subtle manipulation, but I stayed grounded. I reminded myself that I could control my response, even if I couldn't control his actions. And as it turned out, the meeting wasn't about undermining me. It was about a new project he wanted me to lead. Surprisingly, it wasn't framed as a reward or recognition, but as an opportunity. And I realized, with some quiet satisfaction, that I was ready. The project was complex, requiring coordination, leadership, and patience. But I approached it differently than I would have months earlier. I wasn't trying to prove myself. I wasn't trying to impress. I focused on the work itself, on clear communication, and on supporting the team effectively. And in doing so, I noticed something remarkable. People responded positively. They trusted me, they collaborated openly, and the project moved smoothly. Not because I demanded respect, but because I offered guidance and integrity. At home, life mirrored this sense of progress. I had learned to be fully present with Maria, Sam, and Lily. One evening, we sat together after dinner, talking quietly while the kids drew and Maria sipped her tea. I realized that these ordinary moments, the conversations, the laughter, the simple presence, were more meaningful than any professional triumph. They were the quiet victories, the moments that truly shaped a life well lived. One turning point came unexpectedly. A colleague, someone I had once thought indifferent or even subtly antagonistic, approached me privately. "John," she said, "I want to apologize. I misjudged you before. I see now how much effort and integrity you put into your work, and I didn't appreciate it. I wanted to acknowledge that. It was a small gesture, yes, but it struck me profoundly. It wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about honesty, recognition, and the power of perspective." I thanked her quietly, realizing that people often respond to patience and consistency more than confrontation or anger. I had learned to wait, to act with integrity, and to let my actions speak. And the acknowledgement, when it came, felt more genuine than any forced recognition ever could. I also began to see patterns in human behavior I hadn't noticed before. Betrayal, gossip, favoritism, they were often driven by fear, insecurity, or ambition, not malice. That realization didn't excuse bad behavior, but it allowed me to separate the actions of others from my own self-worth. I could observe without being consumed, act without resentment, and choose responses that aligned with my values. At home, I continued nurturing the family bonds I had rebuilt. Sam was thriving in school, but he still faced small challenges that tested his confidence. I made it a point to be patient, offering guidance without judgment. Mistakes are part of learning. I told him one afternoon, as he struggled with a science experiment. "You can try again, and each time, you get stronger." His eyes brightened, and I realized that the lessons I had learned from my own struggles were now guiding him in small but meaningful ways. Lily, too, blossomed in her own way. Her imagination, once chaotic and overwhelming, became a source of joy and inspiration. I joined her in her creative projects, letting her take the lead, listening, encouraging, and celebrating her efforts. These small acts of presence, patience, and attention reminded me daily that resilience and growth are cultivated not just in adversity, but in everyday interactions. Work continued to present subtle challenges. Not everyone responded positively to my calm approach. Some colleagues were still competitive, some still played political games. But I had learned not to be controlled by their actions. I focused on consistency, professionalism, and clear communication. And slowly, I noticed that respect followed naturally. Not because I demanded it, but because I had earned it quietly, steadily, and without ego. Another turning point occurred during a team meeting. Walters attempted to subtly take credit for an idea I had developed. In the past, I would have felt my stomach tighten, my anger rise, my thoughts racing with frustration. But this time I stayed calm. I acknowledged the contribution, credited my team, and presented the idea confidently. The room responded positively. Walters didn't react negatively. And in that moment, I realized that my calm presence, built over months of reflection and self-awareness, had shifted the dynamics entirely. I also began reflecting on the nature of forgiveness more deeply. I had forgiven Mark, Walters, and others, not to excuse their actions, but to release their hold over me. I had learned that holding grudges is a subtle form of imprisonment. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting or pretending nothing happened. It means reclaiming your freedom, your peace, and your ability to act with clarity. At home, Maria noticed a change in me. "You seem lighter," she said one evening, as we sat quietly together. "Calmer," I nodded. "I've learned to let go of what I can't control," I said softly, "and focus on what matters most." She smiled, her eyes reflecting relief and pride. And in that moment, I realized that my personal growth was not just for me. It was for my family, for the people who mattered most, and for the life we were building together. The kids, too, reflected these changes. Sam's confidence grew as he navigated challenges with my guidance. Lily's curiosity blossomed in an environment of encouragement and patience. And I realized that the most important work I could do was at home, not in meetings, not in office politics, but in nurturing resilience, confidence, and love in the next generation. I also began mentoring others quietly at work. Colleagues who were struggling with recognition, confidence, or office politics sought guidance. I shared insights from my own journey, offering advice about patience, consistency, and integrity. And in doing so, I found that my own growth was reinforced, my sense of purpose deepened, and my perspective continued to expand. By the end of Part 9, I had reached a stage of emotional reconciliation. I had acknowledged the past, forgave those who had wronged me, and reclaimed my peace. I had strengthened family bonds, built confidence, and established clarity in my personal and professional life. I had learned that real power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering yourself, nurturing relationships, and living deliberately. I also realized something profound. Life's challenges, while painful, were not punishments, they were lessons. The humiliation, betrayal, and despair I had experienced were catalysts for growth. They had forced me to reflect, to learn, and to become stronger, wiser, and more present. And in that realization, I felt a quiet sense of triumph, not over others, but over fear, doubt, and the limitations I had once placed on myself. And in that quiet triumph, I began to feel ready, not just to face the present, but to embrace the future with clarity, integrity, and deliberate purpose. I had reclaimed my life, my energy, my relationships, and my perspective. And with that reclamation came a sense of calm confidence, a sense that no matter what challenges might arise, I could navigate them with patience, wisdom, and grace. Even with all the progress I had made, life has a way of testing you again, quietly, unexpectedly, in ways that remind you how fragile everything can feel. Part 10 begins in that subtle tension, where the external calm I had built was challenged by the internal storm I sometimes forgot still lingered. It happened on an ordinary Thursday, the kind of day that felt routine, almost dull. I had gotten the kids ready for school, kissed Maria goodbye as she left for work, and settled into my own morning routine. The office was waiting, as always, and I walked in carrying the quiet confidence I had earned over the past months. I was ready, or so I thought. The moment I entered my workspace, I sensed something was off. Whispered conversations halted. Emails piled up faster than usual. There was a tension in the air that I hadn't felt in a while. Walter's smirk was subtle, but it carried the same undertone of manipulation I had endured months before. Something was brewing. And then it hit. A major project I had been leading for months, one I had poured every ounce of effort into, was being questioned in a way that felt personal. Walters suggested that the progress wasn't up to standard, that some errors might have been my fault, and that perhaps I hadn't managed the team effectively. My colleagues exchanged glances. Mark avoided eye contact. My stomach tightened, the familiar mix of frustration, anxiety, and humiliation rising like a tide. But this time I paused. I counted to 10 quietly, grounding myself. I reminded myself of everything I had learned. My worth isn't determined by others. My peace isn't held hostage by opinion, and my integrity is mine to maintain. I spoke calmly, presenting facts, progress reports, and evidence of the work I had done. I acknowledged any small missteps without defensiveness, but I refused to be shamed or undermined. The confrontation stretched for hours. It wasn't explosive, but it was grueling. I could feel the old fear creeping back, that sense of being cornered, exposed, humiliated. But this time, I didn't allow it to consume me. I focused on the truth, my work, and my values. And slowly, the tension began to dissipate. Colleagues nodded, Mark offered quiet support, and even Walters had little room to manipulate the situation. Yet, despite navigating the challenge successfully, I felt the weight of exhaustion afterward. Not physical exhaustion, but emotional fatigue. I realized that growth and resilience are not about never being challenged. They are about surviving, responding, and learning from the challenge without losing yourself. That evening, I returned home and sat quietly on the porch after putting the kids to bed. Maria joined me, and we shared a cup of tea in silence. I spoke softly about the day, the tension, and the exhaustion. She listened, offering quiet comfort without judgment, without trying to fix anything. And in that shared quiet, I realized how much my emotional resilience depended on connection, not just internal strength. Over the following days, I reflected deeply on the past year. The humiliation I had endured, the betrayal I had faced, the internal struggles I had navigated, they had all been part of a larger lesson. But the final fall, the moment of renewed challenge, reminded me that growth is not linear. Progress can feel fragile. Peace can feel precarious. But the true measure of strength is not in avoiding hardship. It's in how you rise after it, in how you respond when you are tested yet again. I also began noticing subtle patterns in the people around me. Some colleagues, faced with my calm authority, began to respect me without needing confrontation. Others still tried manipulation or subtle undermining, but their efforts no longer rattled me. I had learned to see beyond the surface, to observe motives without judgment, and to act deliberately. At home, the reflection continued. I realized how much patience and presence had strengthened my relationships. Sam's confidence was flourishing, Lily's imagination thriving, and Maria and I were more connected than we had been in years. And yet, I also recognized that I needed to remain vigilant. Growth is ongoing. Relationships require effort, and life will always test your limits. One particularly quiet evening, I found myself reflecting on my own inner transformation. The humiliation, betrayal, and despair I had endured were no longer wounds. They were markers of my journey. I had learned patience, clarity, self-worth, and the power of deliberate action. I had learned to navigate fear without letting it control me. I had learned that peace is not given, it is cultivated. I also began to confront my own lingering fears. The fear of failure, of judgment, of repeating past mistakes. These emotions still surfaced, quietly, in moments of reflection. But instead of letting them dominate, I faced them directly. I acknowledged their presence, examined their origin, and reminded myself of the evidence of my growth. I had survived humiliation, rebuilt my life, strengthened my family, and reclaimed my peace. I could face fear without being consumed by it. In this period of reflection, I also began to document my thoughts more deliberately. I wrote about the challenges I had faced, the lessons I had learned, and the subtle victories that often went unnoticed. I recorded strategies that had helped me maintain clarity and integrity, and I reflected on the small moments of connection, patience, and understanding that had defined my journey. Writing became a tool not just for processing emotions, but for reinforcing growth, gratitude, and perspective. The emotional fall also highlighted the importance of humility. I realized that even with growth, strength, and resilience, I was still human. I would face challenges, make mistakes, and feel fear. Accepting this fact did not make me weak. It made me realistic, grounded, and capable of responding thoughtfully. Humility, I realized, is a cornerstone of true strength. Another lesson emerged in the quiet moments at home. I noticed that love, attention, and presence, though subtle and sometimes unremarkable, were the glue that held everything together. Small gestures, like listening, engaging, encouraging, or simply being present, had profound effects on relationships. These were the quiet victories, the moments that truly mattered, and the moments I had almost overlooked in the rush of ambition and pain. During this reflective period, I also revisited the moments of betrayal and humiliation from the past. I did not relive them with anger or resentment, but with curiosity and perspective. I analyzed the motives, the context, and my own responses. I saw how each moment had shaped my resilience, my clarity, and my capacity for empathy. And I realized that even the darkest experiences had contributed to my growth in ways I hadn't fully appreciated. By the end of part 10, I reached a profound understanding. Life's challenges are inevitable, but so are growth, connection, and resilience. Humiliation and betrayal, while painful, are teachers disguised as hardships. The final fall, the moment of renewed challenge, was not a setback. It was a confirmation of how far I had come. It reminded me that peace is maintained through deliberate choice, presence, and integrity, not avoidance of hardship. I began to feel ready for the next steps in life, not naive, not overconfident, but grounded, deliberate, and aware. I had faced humiliation, betrayal, and despair. I had rebuilt my life. I had strengthened my family and my sense of self. And now, I understood that the culmination of this journey would not be marked by external recognition or revenge, but by emotional clarity, resilience, and the ability to live fully and authentically. The final fall had reminded me of something essential. Growth is not a destination. It is a continuous journey. Challenges will arise. People will disappoint. Fear will return. But with awareness, integrity, and deliberate choice, you can navigate it all, emerge stronger, and continue moving forward with clarity, presence, and peace. I had survived humiliation, betrayal, and even my own self-doubt. I had rebuilt my relationships, regained confidence, and nurtured my family. Life had settled into a calm rhythm, but beneath the surface, I sensed that the final chapter was still unfolding. Something subtle, almost imperceptible, was about to shift, a twist that would tie together all the lessons I had learned. It started with a quiet email. Nothing dramatic, just a message from a colleague I had once barely spoken to. The tone was humble, almost tentative. "John," it read, "I wanted to apologize for doubting you before. I see now the dedication and integrity you've shown, and I want to acknowledge that. I hope we can work together more openly from now on." I paused for a moment, staring at the screen. In the past, I might have felt anger, resentment, or suspicion. But now, I felt something different, calm acceptance. I responded simply, acknowledging the message and expressing willingness to collaborate. That small exchange reminded me of the power of patience and consistency. People will eventually see what they need to see, if you remain steadfast, true, and patient. Around the same time, an unexpected event occurred at home. Sam had been working on a science project for school, one that he had initially struggled with. He came running to me, eyes bright, holding the completed project. "Dad, look, I did it," he shouted, excitement radiating from every part of him. I knelt down, examining the project carefully, and then pulled him into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you," I said. "You worked hard, you didn't give up, and you succeeded." That moment was simple, yet it felt profound. It reminded me that life's true victories are not always professional. They are in the small moments of connection, encouragement, and presence. The past months of struggle, humiliation, and growth had all led me here, to this quiet but powerful fulfillment. Then came the twist, subtle but undeniable. Walters, the man who had once humiliated me repeatedly, approached me privately one afternoon. I braced myself, expecting criticism, confrontation, or manipulation. But what he said surprised me. "John," he began, "I underestimated you. You've handled yourself with more professionalism and patience than I expected. I want to work with you differently going forward." I didn't respond immediately. I simply nodded, allowing the moment to settle. There was no need for triumph, no need for vindication. The lesson was clear. Growth, patience, and integrity speak louder than anger or retaliation. The twist wasn't that I was finally recognized. It was that I no longer needed recognition to feel validated. My confidence, my sense of self-worth, and my peace were entirely my own. This realization extended beyond work. At home, Maria noticed a subtle shift as well. "You seem really present these days," she said one evening, sitting beside me on the couch. Like you found a calm you didn't have before. I smiled, feeling gratitude for her insight. I've learned to focus on what I can control and let go of what I can't, I said softly. I've learned that peace comes from within, not from outside validation. The next days brought further confirmation of this truth. Sam and Lily's confidence and joy were flourishing. The kids were thriving not because of any material reward or external acknowledgement, but because they felt seen, supported, and loved. Maria and I were reconnecting, finding moments of intimacy, understanding, and quiet joy that had been absent for too long. And I realized that the most profound work I had done was not in the office. It was here, in the quiet, consistent, intentional care I gave to the people who mattered most. A significant emotional moment occurred when I revisited my journal from months earlier. The pages were filled with raw emotions, frustration, despair, humiliation, and self-doubt. Reading them now, I felt a wave of gratitude. Those words, once heavy with pain, were now markers of growth. They reminded me of the journey I had undertaken, the obstacles I had overcome, and the person I had become. I realized that every painful moment had contributed to the resilience, clarity, and empathy I now carried. Around this time, I also began mentoring a colleague in earnest. She had been struggling with office dynamics, feeling overlooked and undervalued. I shared my experiences candidly, emphasizing the importance of patience, integrity, and self-awareness. I guided her not by telling her what to do, but by helping her see what she could control and how she could navigate challenges without losing herself. Watching her confidence grow reminded me again of how much my own struggles had prepared me to support others. The emotional twist deepened when Sam, inspired by my guidance, began taking initiative in ways that surprised me. He helped Lily with her homework, organized his own school tasks, and even offered to assist with small household chores. His growth was visible, tangible, and deeply rewarding. It was a quiet but undeniable confirmation that the lessons I had internalized, patience, empathy, consistency, resilience, were not just shaping me, but also shaping the next generation. In the office, subtle dynamics shifted further. Colleagues who had once whispered or speculated began to approach me openly, seeking guidance, collaboration, and advice. The environment, once tense and fraught with subtle politics, became more cooperative. I realized that my calm presence, consistency, and integrity had gradually influenced the culture around me, not through aggression or confrontation, but through quiet, steady example. Then came another profound realization. Success, recognition, and validation are fleeting if they are dependent on others. True fulfillment comes from mastery of self, nurturing relationships, and acting in alignment with your values. I had spent months learning this, often through pain, often through silent reflection. And now, with the emotional twist, I saw the culmination of those lessons, not as an external reward, but as an internal state of clarity and peace. At home, the twist manifested in small, everyday ways. Lily created a miniature thank you card for me, filled with crayon illustrations of our family. Sam invited me to watch him play a small soccer match, insisting I sit in the front row and cheer him on. Maria prepared a quiet dinner, taking the time to acknowledge our shared journey and the calm we had built together. These were not grand gestures, but they carried immense emotional weight. They were evidence that growth, patience, and love ripple outward in ways that are often invisible until you pause and notice. I also began reflecting on the nature of humility. Growth had taught me that pride in achievement is natural, but arrogance or the need for validation is destructive. By letting go of the desire to control how others perceive me, I had found freedom. The emotional twist wasn't just that others recognized me. It was that I no longer depended on their recognition. My validation came from within, from my actions, my integrity, and my presence. This realization influenced my approach to every interaction. I became more intentional, more empathetic, more patient. I listened deeply, offered guidance without expectation, and acknowledged the efforts of others without needing them to reciprocate. And I realized that this approach, quiet and deliberate, had transformed my life more than any promotion, recognition, or external validation ever could. One night, as I reflected on the journey, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the challenges that had shaped me, the people who had tested me, the family who had supported me, and the inner strength I had discovered. I understood, deeply, that life's twists, unexpected challenges, subtle betrayals, moments of doubt, are not punishments. They are opportunities for growth, clarity, and transformation. By the end of part 11, I had reached a place of profound realization. The twist of recognition, apology, and subtle reconciliation was not the climax. It was a mirror reflecting the internal journey I had undertaken. I had endured humiliation, betrayal, fear, and doubt. I had rebuilt relationships, cultivated patience, and nurtured resilience. And now, I saw that the ultimate reward was not external. It was the clarity, calm, and integrity that I carried within me. The emotional twist confirmed a truth I had known intellectually but now felt fully. Life is less about the battles you win against others and more about the peace you cultivate within yourself. It's less about validation from the outside world and more about mastery over your own mind, emotions, and actions. And when you achieve that, you are truly free. I had walked a long, hard journey. I had faced humiliation, betrayal, fear, and doubt. I had rebuilt my family, strengthened relationships, and found calm and clarity within myself. Yet, the final chapter was about more than reflection. It was about recognizing the fullness of the journey and the lessons that would carry me forward for the rest of my life. It started with a quiet morning at home. I woke early, before anyone else, and walked to the kitchen with a cup of coffee in hand. The house was still and peaceful. I could hear Sam's soft breathing upstairs and the faint hum of Lily's dreams. Maria was already awake, preparing for her day. The ordinary nature of this morning struck me profoundly. For so long, I had chased recognition, validation, and reassurance from the outside world. And now, I realized the most meaningful victories were here, in these simple moments of presence and connection. The kids came bounding into the kitchen, full of energy, laughter, and mischief. Sam showed me a drawing he had made, proudly narrating the story behind it. Lily insisted I play a small game with her before school. Maria smiled at me, eyes warm, reflecting the calm I had finally cultivated. And in that moment, I felt it fully, the quiet joy of a life rebuilt, of relationships nurtured, of resilience cultivated not for anyone else, but for myself and the people I loved. I thought about work, about Walters, about Mark, and the challenges I had faced there. I realized that the triumphs I had earned weren't in promotions or recognition. They were in the integrity I had maintained, the clarity I had cultivated, and the calm I had carried into every interaction. Even those who had doubted, undermined, or betrayed me were now part of the story that had shaped me, a story that had led me to this quiet strength. The emotional resolution came not with a dramatic confrontation or vindication, but in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Walters approached me one afternoon, no pretense, no tension, simply a professional conversation about the next project. Mark offered support without hesitation. Colleagues sought guidance, collaboration, and advice. And I realized that all the external struggles were now mirrors, reflecting the internal growth I had already achieved. At home, the resolution was even more tangible. Sam and Lily were thriving, confident, and joyful. Maria and I shared quiet conversations, meaningful moments, and laughter that hadn't existed before. The home, once a place of stress and exhaustion, had become a sanctuary of connection, patience, and understanding. And I realized that these relationships, nurtured with care, were the true measure of success. One evening, I sat on the porch alone, reflecting on the journey. I revisited the moments of humiliation and betrayal, but this time without anger, without resentment. I acknowledged them for what they had been, teachers. Each challenge, each betrayal, each moment of fear had pushed me to grow, to reflect, and to become a stronger, calmer, more empathetic person. I understood now that pain and struggle are not punishments. They are tools for growth, if you are willing to learn. I also reflected on the nature of resilience. Resilience isn't about never feeling fear, sadness, or doubt. It's about acknowledging those emotions, understanding them, and choosing not to be controlled by them. It's about remaining present, nurturing relationships, and acting in alignment with your values, even when the world seems chaotic or unjust. I realized that this kind of resilience is far more powerful than any external recognition, promotion, or reward. The final lesson came in subtle ways. I began mentoring others more intentionally, guiding colleagues and friends who struggled with similar challenges. I shared my experiences openly, emphasizing patience, integrity, and self-awareness. I realized that my journey wasn't just about me. It was about how I could help others navigate their own paths, avoid some of the pitfalls I had faced, and cultivate calm, clarity, and resilience in their own lives. At home, I took the time to be fully present with the family. I played with Sam and Lily, talked with Maria, and engaged in the small acts of connection that build lasting relationships. I celebrated small victories, offered encouragement, and listened deeply. These were the quiet moments, the seemingly ordinary interactions, that held the greatest significance. I also reflected on forgiveness. I had forgiven those who had humiliated me, betrayed me, or doubted me, not to excuse their behavior, but to release their hold over my life. Forgiveness was not weakness, it was freedom. It allowed me to move forward unburdened, to cultivate calm, and to focus on what truly mattered. I understood that resentment only prolongs suffering, while forgiveness allows growth, peace, and presence. The twist of Part 11 had reinforced the importance of internal validation. Recognition from others, apologies, or reconciliation were meaningful but not necessary for peace. True fulfillment comes from within, from knowing you have acted with integrity, nurtured relationships, and cultivated clarity and resilience. And that realization brought a sense of freedom I had never experienced before. I thought about the children again, how much they had taught me about patience, empathy, and the power of quiet guidance. I realized that the lessons I had learned from my struggles were now shaping the next generation. And that understanding was both humbling and profoundly rewarding. As the days passed, I noticed a quiet transformation in the people around me. Colleagues who once questioned or doubted me now approached with respect and collaboration. Family dynamics were stronger, calmer, and more connected than ever. And I understood that change is not always dramatic. It is the accumulation of small, deliberate actions, consistent presence, and unwavering integrity. I also began to see my own life in a new light. The humiliation I had endured, the betrayals, the challenges, they were all part of a tapestry that had shaped who I had become. I realized that my journey was not about escaping pain or achieving recognition. It was about cultivating strength, clarity, empathy, and love. And in that understanding, I felt a profound sense of completion. The ultimate emotional resolution came quietly, in the form of reflection, gratitude, and connection. I recognized that life is less about the battles you win against others and more about the peace you cultivate within yourself. It is less about recognition from the outside world and more about mastery over your mind, emotions, and actions. And when you achieve that, you are truly free. I also realized the importance of living deliberately. Every interaction, every decision, every moment of presence matters. Life's challenges, setbacks, and betrayals will continue to appear, but with awareness, patience, and integrity, they become opportunities for growth, not sources of despair. The final days of this journey were filled with quiet celebrations. Sam's achievements, Lily's imagination, and Maria's unwavering support were constants in my life. I took time to acknowledge the lessons, the growth, and the resilience I had cultivated. I celebrated the small victories, the moments of connection, and the internal peace I had earned through struggle. And then I understood the last lesson fully. Life is not about avoiding humiliation, betrayal, or pain. It is about how you respond, how you grow, and how you maintain your integrity and presence. It is about nurturing the people who matter most and cultivating clarity, patience, and empathy within yourself. And when you do that, life, even with all its challenges, becomes meaningful, fulfilling, and beautiful. By the very end of Part 12, I felt a profound sense of completion. The journey, which had begun with humiliation, fear, and despair, ended with clarity, resilience, and love. I had learned that true strength comes not from external recognition, but from mastery of self, consistency in action, and deliberate presence in relationships. I had discovered the freedom that comes from forgiveness, the joy that comes from connection, and the peace that comes from integrity. And as I sat quietly in the evening, watching the sunset with Maria and the kids, I realized that this was the ultimate victory. Not a promotion, not recognition, not revenge, but a life lived with awareness, presence, and love. A life rebuilt from pain, strengthened by struggle, and enriched by relationships. A life that, despite its trials, was mine to cherish fully. I had walked through darkness, faced betrayal, endured humiliation, and emerged stronger, wiser, and calmer. And now, with the lessons etched deeply in my heart, I was ready for whatever life would bring next. Not with fear, not with anger, but with clarity, presence, and the quiet, unshakable confidence that comes from knowing your own worth and living deliberately in alignment with it. Life, I realized, is less about what happens to you and more about how you respond. It is about love, patience, integrity, and the quiet victories that matter most. And that is the truth I carry forward, the lesson I hope never to forget, and the foundation on which I will continue to build the rest of my life.